You're studying 2 Samuel, and you had come to chapter 13 and the molestation of Tamar by her half-brother Amnon. Amnon was the oldest son of David. He had taken a woman named Ahinoam, a Jezreelitess, and she gave birth to Amnon. He's the oldest son and the heir apparent to the throne of David. We have here a picture of the calamity of sin. David's sin is repeated by Amnon, in a sense, and it causes Absalom, the third oldest and the full brother to Tamar, to be very vengeful toward Amnon. It will take Absalom, as you read in the text there, about 2 years as he waits to take his vengeance on Amnon. Tamar did not try to hide what happened to her. She put on sackcloth and ashes, according to verse 18 of chapter 13, and indicated to her brother what had happened. Absalom, on the other hand, told her not to tell, to be quiet. Leave it alone. He was wanting to catch his brother in a very deceitful way, and so he didn't want Tamar going around telling everybody what had happened. But somehow David heard about it. Look at verse 21 of chapter 13. But when King David heard all these things, he was very wroth. The only thing is, he just got angry. And it's interesting to me that he did nothing about what Amnon did. I don't know exactly when King David heard all these things. I do know he heard them before Absalom did what he intended to do. And it's the case that David was supposed to have punished Amnon. In fact, if you'll look at Leviticus 20, verse 17, the very punishment that should have been meted out to Amnon should have been meted out to David. It wasn't. Leviticus 20:17. Someone read that for us. I can't find it in my Bible. It's back here somewhere. Leviticus 20, verse 17. These two should have been exiled. David did not act on what Amnon did, which led to the result that Absalom would take his vengeance. When I read this again this evening, 5 things came to my mind about this kind of scripture. The first thing that hits me every time I read these kinds of accounts in God's holy word is that the scriptures are totally honest about the activities of people. Nothing is hidden. That tells me that bad men did not write this book, because they would not write a book that condemned what they were doing. But the report here is by God Himself as to what happened. And another thing that struck me, this was not a time in Israel when she was being defeated, when she was in some kind of a civil war or in some kind of situation of poverty. This was a period of prosperity when David committed his sin and when Amnon did. This is a period of prosperity, a good time, and yet both of these men, like father, like son, sinned. A third thing I thought about, this was a process going on in David's life and obviously in Amnon's life. Look at 2 Samuel 5:13, someone, please. Notice that David was not an innocent human being when it came to women.
David took his more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem after he was come from Hebron, and there were yet sons and daughters born to David.
Now keep in mind these sons, because they're going to become part of this account here in a moment. But But David had many wives, many concubines. And what about Solomon? Like father, like son, like son, like father, like son. So this is a process going on in these men's lives, which leads me to think that sin leads to worse sin. David took another man's wife. Amnon took his own half-sister. She even said to him, let the king decide this. In those days you could have married your half-sister. But Amnon would not wait for the king to allow it. He took her. He molested her. And I learned something else from this. David's sin, and that's what this is all about here, brothers and sisters, led to years of suffering in his family. There was incest. What else did I write here? Fratricide, a brother kills a brother. There was rebellion in the nation. Absalom will rebel against. There was civil war in Israel. There was revolt and intrigue. Years of suffering. David, you started it. But when you read verse 21, keep in mind, David did not do a thing about what his oldest son did. He just got angry, but he didn't act. And that opened the door for Absalom's coming after Amnon. Verse 22 of chapter 13. And Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. How you doing, Amnon? That's all he would say to him. How's the day going? He never indicated, and for 2 whole years, verse 23, what had happened. But there came a time at Baal Hazor. That's Absalom's plantation, if you please. He owns a lot of sheep, and it was the time of the year for sheep shearing. That's a time of festivities. It's a time for a party. 1 Samuel 2, 5 and verse 8. It's time to have a feast. This is very far north in Palestine. It's near Ephraim. All of his half-brothers and step-brothers and whoever else he knew, come on. But he sets them up ahead of time and says, King David, father, I have a lot of sheep shearers, and it's time to feed them. I want to have a party. I beg thee, let your servants go with, or let his servants go with me, thy servant. Could you let my servants go over there to Baal Hazor with me? He's got a plot going. And the king said to Absalom, no, let's not all now go. We'll owe you then. Don't you love Christmas gifts? You give me one, I have to give you one. Why don't we just have, if you give me one, so what? Then I won't have to give you one back. He said, no, we'd owe you then. But Absalom said, let us go. And David said, I'm not going, but I'll give you a blessing, a present. How do I know that's a present? From what Abigail did for David. And the same word translated blessed here is the one that tells about all those gifts that she brought to David, 1 Samuel 25, 27. So he said, well, I can't go, Absalom, but here's a gift. David has no idea what his third oldest son is plotting. If he did, he may have stopped it completely. Then Absalom lays down the charge. He said, let Amnon go with us. I know you can't go, Dad, but how about Amnon? Let him go with us. And the king said unto him, why should he go with thee? Absalom didn't tell him, did he? Just kept saying, let him go. He's one of the king's sons. I'd like to have all of them there for the party. Why not? Keep in mind, folks, that Amnon stands between Absalom and the throne. That's the oldest son, Amnon. If Absalom can get rid of him, something else, he's angry with him, yes, but if he can get rid of him, something else is going to happen. He wants the throne. And we'll see that later. Now notice what's happening to David's family. His oldest son molests one of his daughters. His third oldest son wants to kill that fellow, plus the fact that later on Absalom will decide, I want the throne too. And so a lot of intrigue now, a lot of war getting planned. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, before they ever had this party, he said, mark ye now when Amnon's heart is merry, let's get him drunk. Do you know the Bible says, woe unto him that gives drink to his neighbor? This is a sin. Woe unto him that gives strong drink to his neighbor. And when I tell you, kill him, do it and don't be afraid. Now, why would they be afraid? That's the king's son. That's the oldest son of the most powerful man in the whole world. And when they kill him, every one of these fellows will run for his life, including Absalom. Be courageous and be valiant. That's not Prince Valiant. And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him on his mule. On a mule, I would have gotten a fast horse, and fled. That must have been Festus there riding that mule. Huh? And it came to pass that the news came to David, saying, watch this, watch what they said. Absalom has killed every one of his brothers, and not one of them is left. Now, one of these fellows that went to the party is named Jonadab. He's the son of David's brother. It's David's nephew. And so he's standing there listening to this report that all of these sons were killed. Well, David falls on the ground, tears his clothes. He's all in grief here at what he just heard. My whole family was just wiped out. And Jonadab, the son of Shimea, David's brother, answered and said, you guys got this wrong, you know. Let my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men, the king's sons. For Amnon only is dead, for by, the King James has appointment, by the mind of Absalom. This hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. David, your third oldest son has had this in his mind since the day his sister was defiled. Now therefore, now Jonadab tells him the truth. Let not my lord the king take the thing to his heart to think that all of his sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead. But Absalom ran away. And there was a fellow standing there taking watch, one of the guards of the king, and he notices something. He says, David, look, behind you, here come all your sons, coming home from the party. Here it is. And soon as that watchman, as Jonadab quit speaking, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and cried. I don't know what made them come home. They were afraid of David. They'd been part of the plot. But they come home and cry. Reminds me when I caught my children doing something. They tried to cry really quickly so they wouldn't get a spanking. Sometimes they would make me laugh, though. I went out one day and my newspaper was on the porch roof. So I said to my two sons, how did the newspaper get on the porch roof? And my older son was quick to say, Mark threw it up there. And Mark looked at me and says, but Daddy, he dared me. Got to laugh at that one. That's a good answer. These sons came home. I don't know why. But Absalom kept running. He will run for nearly 2 years, or almost 3 years, before he's allowed to come home. And meanwhile, while he's running, he gets an idea that maybe he could be the king. But Absalom ran and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. That's his mother's father. This is where Absalom was born, in Geshur. He was born in Hebron, near Geshur, And when he was very little, they moved to Jerusalem when David became king. Absalom is running 3 years, verse 38. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted, his heart was okay. The word comfort is L-E-B in the Hebrew, means his heart. His heart was okay concerning Amnon. He's dead. David had a rather unusual approach to death. When it occurred, it was over. He got up and washed and cleaned himself and can't do anything about it now. I usually get amused when I read what Isaiah said to King Hezekiah. He said, King Hezekiah, what did you do? What did you show those Babylonians when they came because you were sick? He said, I showed them everything in my house. I showed them in the palace and the temple and all the gold. He said, well, Hezekiah, what's going to happen is your descendants are going to go into Babylonian captivity because they're going to come back and get that stuff. Hezekiah said, well, good, it's not going to happen to me anyway. Isn't that a good answer? That's what he said. Read the 39th chapter of Isaiah. Hezekiah said, I'm glad it's not happening to me. Well, that's a rather strange attitude toward your own children and descendants. Well, his descendants went into captivity. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all seed royal, descendants of King Hezekiah, descendants of King David. Now Joab is a general. He's a leader. Yeah. Anybody have a thought about chapter 13? I don't know where you were last week. I just thought I'd catch up. Did you finish 13 last week? More or less? Oh, okay. Well, let's go to chapter 14 then. Now, Joab has a plan. It's been long enough that Absalom's been running. Let me figure out a way to get him back. I like this about Joab. He's more than just a general. He is a person who knew people. And he knows that David is hurting because his son's not there. David loved Absalom. When Absalom dies, that great cry from David's lips, oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son, would to God I'd died for thee. Well, he loves Absalom. And Joab knows that. He knows people. That's a good leader. Not only is he a good military general, he knows people. Look at Ecclesiastes 2:14. Any leader needs this quality. Ecclesiastes 2:14. What's that first part? Ecclesiastes. What's the first part say? The wise man what? Eyes are in his head. He knows people. He can see things. Well, Joab knows David. And he wants to get David and Absalom back together. So he gets this lady in Tekoa. And she's a rather intelligent lady, a wise woman. And he said, I want you to pretend something. I want you to pretend that you're mourning the loss of your son who was killed by his brother. So put on mourning apparel. That's black, I suppose. And anoint not thyself with oil. Don't put on your makeup. But he be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead. Look as bad as you can. Look pitiable here. Go in with puppy eyes. Yeah. What was it, Brother Mangum, you used to say about Brother Bland? That with those eyes of his, he could get anything out of anybody, those puppy eyes. All right, this lady comes in there looking just miserable. I think she was on a soap opera or something, and he hired her. I'm not sure. Here she comes, and come to the king and speak. Tell him this. So Joab gives her a story to touch a king's heart. Here's what I want you to say. Put the words in her mouth. And when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, did obeisance. That's what happens when you approach a king. How do we approach our king, incidentally? And said, "Help, O king. I got a problem, King David." And the king said unto her, "What's your problem? What aileth thee?" She said, "I'm a widow woman, and now what she adds, my husband's dead." Well, I guess so if you're a widow woman. She doesn't mean a little woman, she means widow woman. When old Bobby was in school here, he used to say widow in such a way I thought he said little. She's a widow woman. My husband's dead. She's really going to tell a sad story. You ever been around people like this when they want to get something out of you? They tell the saddest story they can. Some folks come and try to get money from the church with these sad stories. There was a fellow that came forward at South Haven one morning. He said he wanted to be baptized. I said, "Well, okay." And I started asking him all the questions. He got every answer right. So we baptized him. And when he came up out of the water, he said, "Could I talk to the elders?" I said, "Uh-oh." And surely enough, he wanted some financial help. Okay, they helped him. About 2 months later, this fellow came forward again. He hadn't been there for 2 months. He said, "I want to be baptized." I said, "No." He said, "Why?" I said, "I baptized you 2 months ago." He'd forgotten he'd been there. But he had a sad story to tell us. All right. She's got the saddest story. Now, King David, I'm a widow. And I had 2 sons. And they fought in a field. Well, that may be about 2 brothers. I guess they could have a fight. And there was none to part them, and one of my sons killed the other one. This story's getting sadder and sadder. Aren't you about to cry? You know she made it up. That's why we're not crying. And behold, the whole family is against me because they want me to deliver my other son to the avenger. And they want to kill him. You know, that's what they did back then. You kill somebody in my family, I send the avenger, and he kills somebody in your family, or maybe your whole family. That's why the Lord said, "Eye for eye and tooth for tooth." Let's not be killing the whole family. Let's do justice. Well, she said, "They want to kill my other son for the life of his brother whom he slew. And they want to destroy the only heir left, and so they shall quench my coal which is left. The fire that's in me will die out," she said, "if they do this." I suppose David's really listening intently now. "And they're not going to leave my husband any name. It will be removed from the earth forever." And David said, "Go home and I'll decide what I want to do." And the woman of Tekoa said unto the king, "My lord, O king," she didn't go, "the sin is upon me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless." Uh-oh. You don't have problems like this, King David. We do. Let's learn something. Leaders need a special knowledge of human nature. David, you missed something here. Because she says to him, "My house has problems. I know your house doesn't." She's going to let the cat out of the bag here in a moment as to what she was doing. She's not leaving. King David, I want you to think about the Lord God. And I don't want you to allow the revengers of blood to destroy anymore. You folks have studied the refuge cities, and you remember there were 6 of them, 3 Transjordan, 3 in Palestine proper. And a man who committed a manslaughter of some kind could flee to one, remain there until the high priest died, and be free from the avenger. If the avenger caught him outside of the city, he could kill him. They had revengers of blood, lest they destroy my son. And he said, "As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth." She's convinced him now not to allow her son to be... I don't know if she's even got any sons. But she's got David in a frame of mind now of saying, this isn't going to happen. Then the woman said, let me tell you something else, King David. Let me speak one word unto my lord the king. And he said, say on. Wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? You're doing, David, this is about the way Nathan approached him, isn't it? You're doing, David, what you're telling me shouldn't be done to my son. You're killing yours. You've exiled your own son, for the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty. What you're saying has a fault in it, in that the king does not fetch home again his banished son. So, David, you're the problem. You tell me you're not going to let my son be touched, and you won't let your son come home? What does anger do to us? Frustration, especially leaders, especially all of us, really. Are there things in our lives that maybe we should rethink? David wasn't like Joab. Joab thought ahead. If this thing continues between Absalom and David, there's going to be a real problem in the kingdom. Joab knew that Absalom would eventually revolt. He did anyway, but in exile it would have been quicker. There will be complications if Absalom is kept in exile. And so this leader, this King David, had forgotten something. He'd forgotten that what he was suffering personally was wrapped up in the whole good of the public. She said, but King David, we're all alike. You banished your own son. That's no different from that son of mine I said they were going to kill. You said, don't kill him. What about your own son? We all die, David. We must needs die. And as water spilled on the ground. All of us come to the same end, David. You're no different from me when it comes to relationships with your sons. Neither doth God respect any person. God looks at all of us alike, David. You have to do the same thing. Yet doth he devise means that his banishment be not expelled from him. You keep him in exile, David. You need to fix that. That's why I came today. Because the people have made me afraid. And I said, I'm going to go talk to the king, that the king will perform the request of his handmaid. When I came before you, David, I thought that you would listen to me. I thought you would hear. That you would deliver me out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. Sounds like she was telling the truth there. Don't know if this is a made-up story, but I think it is because Joab said, I'll give you the words to tell. But she doesn't let up on the story. She's in front of a king after all and could lose her life here. Then thine handmaid said, the word of my lord the king shall now be, I believe David will speak to my heart, which he did. Then she really butters up David. She said, you're an angel. You sisters know how to get anything out of your husband. Just call him angel. You know, an angel's always up in there and always harping, so. Are you folks listening tonight? Y'all go to sleep. Reminds me of that woman that told her husband, you're as stupid as water in the bottom of a hole. And he said she meant well. Did you get that? Okay. Everybody awake? Okay, I don't know. I thought I lost you there. She said, David, you're an angel of God. She's buttering him up. So is my lord the king to discern good. I know you'll do the right thing, David. Therefore the Lord thy God will be with thee. He said, who told you to tell me this? The king answered and said unto the woman, hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. And the woman said, let my lord the king now speak. And the king said, is not the hand of Joab with thee in all this? Joab put you up to this, didn't he? And the woman answered and said, As thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left from aught that my lord the king has spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me. And he put all these words in the mouth of thine handmaid. But we had a good intention, David. We had a good plan. We wanted you to let Absalom come home. To fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing. And my Lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. Well, she's done with her story, and he lets her leave. Evidently, we're not told what she did after this. But the king said to Joab, Go bring Absalom home. I'm glad David's not so angry anymore. He might have done something to Joab for what he did here. He said, Go therefore and bring him home. But you know what? After Absalom came home, he didn't get to speak to his daddy for 2 whole years. Look at verse 28 there. And Joab fell to the ground on his face. He was so grateful David didn't have him killed or something for what he pulled here. And bowed himself and thanked the king. I get an impression here of something that really strikes me. When Nathan came before David, Nathan, a prophet of God, David, he wasn't afraid of David. Joab is. Joab is not, it could have been put to death here by this king. You remember when the Jews said to Samuel, Give us a king? But they added something else to that. What was it? Give us a king like all the other nations. Every king they had was like that. Every king they had thought he had the power of life and death. Every king they had thought he could take as many wives and concubines as he wanted. Every king they had was in love with himself. Every king they had was selfish. Put himself first. They got kings like the nations, all right. They could have had a king. Deuteronomy 17, Moses said, here's the kind of king you could have. He has to be a spiritual leader. He has to make copies of the law of God. He has to be a man of God. He can't be a military man. He can't build an armory. He can't have horses. He can't make foreign alliances. He can't make military alliances. You can have that kind of a king. That's not the kind of a king they wanted. And I learned something about that. Our leaders are given to us by God, yes or no? Well, we get the king we ask for. Always. God allows it. Here's Joab, though. He's afraid of David because Joab knows this man could kill me or have me killed. But he's glad that he found grace in David's sight that day. David realizes, I need to let Absalom come home. Took a lot of courage, it seems to me, on Joab's part to do this. But Joab looked ahead. He's a good leader. He's a military man, but he's a good leader, even though he's a military man. He knew there was going to be trouble in the kingdom if Absalom did not come home. So Joab rose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him go to his own house. I don't want to talk to him. I don't want him to see my face. And for 2 years, this man would not talk to his third oldest son. I'm not exactly sure how deep David had whether David had admitted how deep his grief was. But even though Amnon did what he did, David grieved over him. Have you known folks in your life who were just reprobate, but when they died, they became great people? Especially at the funeral service. Does anybody know where they bury wicked people? I've never been to a funeral service of a wicked person. I think I was, but they didn't admit it when I got there. You heard about that fellow that was preaching about this fellow that died, and he was extolling all his virtues, and finally the widow said to her son, go up there and see if that's really Daddy's body in the casket. Is that really Daddy? David's grieving even over this wicked son of his. He doesn't want to talk to Absalom. It could be, too, that since he had him in exile, that embarrassed him. I shouldn't have left him out there that long. Maybe that's the problem. But he won't talk to him for 2 years. I don't know all the problems here. We're not told. So Absalom goes to his own house, but he didn't see David. Absalom is a handsome fellow, ladies. He's a good-looking fellow. In fact, the Bible says he had beauty. Long hair, I tell you what. But he is a good-looking fellow. He works out a lot, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. No blemish in him. That's a good-looking guy. And I tell you what, he's Daddy's boy. Whenever he gets to talk to David again, I want you to see what David does for him. Look at 15, verse 1. Look what Absalom gets in the kingdom. This is amazing. He gets a chariot, brand new car. He gets 50 horsemen to run in front of him. Here comes Absalom. Oh, I'm in there just telling everyone, here he comes. Reminds me of old Haman, who got fooled, didn't he? This Absalom is a daddy's boy. He lives a great life after he comes home. He's got it all. But he wants more. He's got 3 new sons and a daughter. Name is Tamar. Right. Yeah. This little boy right here is the son of the boy whose brother died when his brother was 4.5 months old. My grandson, the first grandson. That boy's name that died was James. Well, this boy is James. So we have another James in the family. This is David's son. David would be the younger brother of that one that died. But his name, the boy that died, was James. Well, here is Tamar, who was molested. He names his daughter Tamar. And now they're closing the doors and telling me to quit. So we'll stop. If you'll tune in next week, we'll get the rest of the story.